So if you look at your card, and then you may know that there are cards in the middle of your table. Flip that card over as well. Don't switch it for your card. Don't try to see. Okay. So you have a card that shares things in common with someone else, with other people in the room. So I know you sat next to your friends and the people you already know, but now you make you move. So you must go find the people that have the card that is common with yours and sit at a table that is appropriate for your card. So if you have questions about that, you can look at the tables and see if you can find that. So now that you've moved away from your friends that you sat with on purpose, you may be sitting with people you don't know, and you may be sitting with people you do know. But if you could introduce yourselves, it's okay if you already know each other, do it anyway. And then I need you to talk to each other long enough to find 2 unique things you have in common. They have to be unique. I wore shoes today. You know, I was born. Right? You're going to work a little harder than that. So find 2 unique things you have in common, and you can come up with 1 question for me. If you care to know. I reserve the right not to answer. And then pick someone to be the reporter for your group, okay? Because I would like you to report out a few things. Who are the members of your group? If you could share their disciplines. If you're not a faculty member, then share wherever it is that you work and what you do. And then share your common ground or question. Okay, so you have a little assignment.
I'm a faculty member in the science department of East Country with Paul Moore, AD of Business, and Alan Leibowitz, AD of Math. Our 3 sort of unique things were that none of us are native Floridians. We all have sons, and we all went to state colleges for undergrad. And then our question for you was, are you a member of any Greek letter organizations?
No. So we'll move to the table. Reporter. Cindy is nominated for the next class.
You can't read my handwriting.
Okay. Well, I've been volunteered. I'm Joe from Computer Science here at North Campus. This is Jasmine from the Math Department. This is Lloyd, he's AD in Vision Care, Health Science. And this is Mildred, she's the AVP for the technical program, right?
Yep.
All right. We actually, our questions were a lot different than what he had. We actually was thinking from the growth mindset. And our question was, how do we get a student who maybe in a fixed mindset to move to the growth mindset?
Okay, so you will get a very thorough answer to that in the next 2 hours. What are your unique things that you came up with?
Well, we actually, it was hard to find unique things. The group was kind of split on most things. So, unique things we didn't really come up with. Other than the fact,
unique.
Semi-unique. What's that?
Semi-unique.
Semi?
Yeah, we always realized we were committed to student success.
All right, I'll take
that.
Right. All right, well, I'll take that. It shows you put forth effort. All right, this group here.
I'm Millie. I'm the Student Coordinator at the Academic Success Center. This is Jacqueline. She's the Associate Dean of Health Sciences. This is Lisa, and she's the Associate Dean of Science. And this is Kyla, she is a math faculty. And what we have in common, we all have older siblings, and we all love to shop. And what we have for you is what got you interested in the growth mindset.
Okay, so the short version of that, I was really interested in self-efficacy theory. I was introduced to that during my early doctoral work, and it just sort of stuck with me. You always wonder why it is that some students who have like the world on their shoulders push forward and find success when others don't. And so self-efficacy theory to me really helped me to wrap my head around the answer to that question. So I focused on that for most of my doctoral work, and I'll talk a little bit about the things that I ended up doing with Carnegie. But when I got involved with the Carnegie Foundation, that was a common theme of interest in terms of research with some other folks. And it really fits well under the umbrella of the whole growth mindset theory. And so that is what got me on board with the work they were doing with growth mindset theory. So the self-efficacy led to my work with growth mindset. All right, wonderful. So here.
And I guess with the triangles.
Yes.
So.
The triangle.
Well, the donkeys, I don't know. Donkeys, let us do an answer. That's so my name is Rupert Zielinski. I work at Communication and Fine Arts, and Pam is in reading and ESL, and Hannah is in computer sciences, and Esmeralda. Well, we're trying to establish whether she is truly part of BCC or the county, but she's been here for a very long time, as I recall. And let's see, we need to find common factors. Well, one of them, we've all ridden horses before. Okay. Another one, we have been working at some part in BCC for 3 years.
Okay.
So that varies. And we didn't get to the question, but I thought I'd ask you. I'm just going to take a stab at it and ask you, what do you do to exercise your brain?
To exercise my brain, I really love like puzzles.
Okay.
I like Sudoku and these logic puzzles and things like that. So that's one of my little nerd pleasures. I like to do puzzles when I just don't feel like doing anything else. So that's one of the ways that I exercise my brain. And perpetually staying in school, I think that does it too.
Good. Lifelong learning.
Yes. To stay with me.
Well, we're Team Wellness or Diamond. And at our table here, we have Martha, who is from the Academic Success Center on North Campus. Silvio, who is in the engineering department here on the North Campus. And we have Karen, who's the AD in the English department here on North Campus. And I'm Mary Janika, I'm in education at North Campus. We found out that none of us have pets.
Okay.
And we're all right-handed.
Okay.
And our question to you is Disney or Universal Studios?
Universal Studios. Universal Studios. All right, this group here. Instantaneous nomination on speaker.
I'm Susan Brody in the Math Department, and we have Joyce from Academic Affairs, Daniel from Social Sciences on board, and Herb is from Economics on Central. Yes. We all three, well, Joyce joined us late, so the three of us have in common that we have all taught here in our same position for over 20 years, three of us. And we all like the Miami Dolphins, and we're feeling very frustrated with them right now.
Very well said.
But you kind of already answered our question, because our question was what got you started with the mindset, or if it was a part of your doctoral program.
Okay, wonderful. And our last but not least.
Hi, I'm Ricky. I teach economics. This is Marcos and Christine. They're both in computer science. What we found common among all of us is that we all like Disney. So like I mentioned, the original Disney cartoon, Steamboat Willie, and they actually knew about it. It's getting increasingly rare these days. And we all like math and science.
Okay.
And our question to you was, in your opinion, especially since you're a math teacher, does math teach you to think? And is this more valuable than the actual discipline itself?
Okay, so that's a two-part question. Does math teach you to think? I would say yes to that, in my opinion. Of course, it all depends on how you teach. So it really has a lot to do with the curriculum and the pedagogy and the way in which you facilitate learning in the math classroom. So I think it absolutely should teach you to think. And hopefully, you know, that is the goal. But we also know there's lots of differences in the way in which people learn in the classroom. So the extent to with which that actually occurs may vary. I think I put that as PC as possible. And then what was the other part?
Well, you think this is actually a more valuable outcome because most people don't actually apply math, you know, in their careers, business people.
Right. So absolutely, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, those are things that should be, you know, major parts of what students take away from their experience with math. Because as you mentioned, you know, most people won't factor later in life. But in the process of learning to factor, you're learning problem solving. You know, a lot of times students will talk about like a puzzle. So there's lots of thinking and reasoning that takes place in the process of doing the math that happens. So if you can teach a student to think and reason, I think you've accomplished a lot more than just teaching them to do math in terms of what would be valuable to them in life. So absolutely. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for entertaining my little activity. And we will get a better understanding of what was its purpose in a little bit. I'm going to see if you can make some connections on your own, and then we'll talk about it more explicitly. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation, but we will come back to it because I'm sure you're wondering why in the world I made you do that in the first place. So, and when you're done, if you could leave the cards on the table, because I have to do this 2 more times. And don't tell anyone what you did. That part needs to stay secret. Okay? All right, so you already got the title, Field Burn, helping students to grow their brain muscle. I used that phrase a few weeks ago in class, and when I was asked to come up with a catchy title, it just seemed appropriate. And so we'll talk a little bit more about where that comes from as well. Okay? So to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing, I'm going to spend the first part of this workshop talking about growth mindset theory and its connections to a more practical theory, which is the work that's being done in productive persistence. That may be another kind of catchphrase that you have heard before. Then we'll take a little break because by then you'll be wanting to get up and move around, and all that stuff you drank will be ready to move on as well. And then we come back, we'll do some brainstorming and some idea sharing. So talk about it, and then we'll spend some time trying to really think about how we might be able to apply what we've learned. Okay? If at any point in time you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. So, of course, we'll do some extra Q&A at the end, but along the way, you're perfectly free and welcome to ask questions. So, this kind of goes along with the question that I was asked earlier, how I got involved. So here's a question that the Carnegie Foundation asked at the beginning of the Statway project. There were 1,100 students that took part in the survey, and the statement was made, being a math person or not is something about you that you really can't change. Some people are good at math and other people aren't. And so students were asked to say whether they agreed or disagreed with this statement. So of the 1,100 students that were posed with this question, 68% of them agreed. That's it, you are or you aren't. And then 32% of course disagreed. So this is a great example of the idea of what it means to have a fixed mindset. Student mindsets are very powerful. This is what they believe about themselves, and in particular to our conversation today, what they believe about themselves in the school setting. But mindset theory can be applied in a variety of settings, within education and also outside. Of course, we're going to focus on education today because that's what you all are interested in. And so when we talk about the student mindset, what specifically we're referring to is their own personal beliefs about themselves and the school setting or school environment. And this can apply in a variety of disciplines, a variety of circumstances, so it's not something that's confined only to math. It's not even something that's confined only to a classroom. We'll talk a little bit about some research studies later on, and you'll see that it's been applied in a variety of ways. So when we talk about student mindset, it's so important to have this conversation because it can affect both their learning and their growth. And there's really two types of mindsets. There's the fixed mindset, where students believe that their intelligence is finite. It's something that cannot be changed. They doubt their own intelligence, particularly in times of challenge. And so, of course, this is going to undermine any ability that they have to be resilient in those situations and to learn under challenge. As a contrast, there is the growth mindset. And students that are exhibiting a growth mindset will feel like intelligence is something that they can develop. Not necessarily something they have or do not have, which will, of course, then help them be more resilient in times of challenge and will allow them to show greater learning and achievement because of the perspective that they have. So I like this little statement here because it really sums it up pretty succinctly. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So whatever that perspective is, that's going to determine the ability that you have to be successful. So students that think they can't will not be able to achieve, and those that think they can will be more likely to do so. And specifically from Carol Dweck's work, she breaks it down and kind of categorizes it into a couple of different things. So when you look at students with the fixed mindset and those with the growth mindset, you are able to identify them from a variety of characteristics. First of all, when it comes to their goal, for students with a fixed mindset, the goal is to look smart. So if asking questions makes you look dumb, then asking questions is something they won't do because it doesn't allow you to look smart. Or if going to get help in the tutoring center would make you look like you're dumb, then they won't go get help in the tutoring center. If we look at the idea of valuing effort, help, and strategies, that's not something that they value. So getting help, putting forth extra effort, using good strategies are not the kinds of things that are of value to them. When posed with challenge, they're more likely to give up. And so, of course, in times of adversity, their grades will decrease or just remain low. On the other hand, a student with a growth mindset, their goal is to learn. So whatever that means, whatever it takes, they're willing to do it. So if it means going to get help, if it means going to the tutoring center, if it means asking questions in class, if that is what will allow them to learn, they're more willing to do that. Same thing with effort, help, and strategy. So definitely a connection there. They're more willing to put forth extra effort, to ask for help, to use different strategies if it means that it will help them to learn. When they are faced with challenge, their response is to just work harder. Because working harder, working smarter is what is going to help them to learn. And then in times of adversity, because this is their attitude, their grades are going to increase. So there was a question posed about how then do we alter student mindsets, right? So if there is a fixed mindset, there is a growth mindset, I can identify students that perhaps are exhibiting traits of one who has a fixed mindset. Well, it seems like it's really helpful for them to have this growth mindset. Well, how do I get them there, right? So we have two ways that we can work towards altering students' mindsets. And the first is by redirecting their thinking through precise theory-based interventions. So these might happen either in the classroom or online. It's going to refocus their learning, refocus them on learning rather than things like, I'm not a math person. So instead of perpetuating this feeling of I'm not a math person, let's put that aside and let's focus on learning and how we can accomplish that. Or being afraid to make mistakes. It might involve things like reading, writing, video activities. I'll give you a few examples in a minute of some things that have been done. And the big thing is that it really teaches them about neuroscience and growing their brain. So a large part of these theory-based interventions spends time really introducing students to how the brain works. The fact that they can make connections, build new neurons, they work their brain like they would work a muscle. So this allows them to really make a connection with what's going on and realize that putting forth that effort is going to make a difference. So here's an example of just a little screenshot from an intervention that was used with high school students. And it's based on a metaphor that the brain is like a muscle. I won't read it to you. If you want to read through it, you can. But you notice that there is a focus on this idea that just like we work our muscles, we work out to grow stronger, we can work out our brains to grow smarter. And that's actually where the field burn came from. Because I had this conversation with my students in class, and I said, have you ever been to a personal trainer? Right? Or been to the gym to work out? But the more you work, the harder you work, how do you feel? Stronger. You feel stronger, but what do you feel first? Pain. You feel sore, right? You feel tired. You start whining. What does the trainer say? Suck it up. Suck it up. Keep moving. Feel the burn, right? So, right, no pain, no gain. So that process, when you're all said and done, in the midst of it, it might hurt a little, right? You're going to have to put forth a lot of effort. There's pain that may even come with it. But as you become more familiar with what's going on, you understand that pain, that burn, it means what? It's working. You're getting stronger. You start to see differences in your muscles, the way your clothes fit. So making this direct connection, then you tell students, well, the brain is a muscle. And we work it the same way that we work the rest of the muscles in our body. And so in order for you to be able to grow your muscles, do you go work out the same every time? Do you use the same little 5-pound weight? Right? Use it for a while, and then what do? You increase. You work harder. You pick up something that's a little heavier next time, because you know if you stay at that in the easy lane, that you're not going to be able to accomplish much as it relates to growing your muscles. So your brain is the same way. It's a muscle, just like the rest of your muscles. And so in order for you to work it, you've got to challenge it. So if you really want to make progress in growing your brain, you're going to have to work harder. You're going to have to move some heavy weights. You're going to have to work problems that are challenging, not just the easy ones. So using this metaphor, there was a research study that worked with high school students. And again, I'll give you some details of some of these studies in a minute. But this is just one example of an online intervention that was used to introduce students to this idea of how the brain works, the neuroscience behind it, and connect them to the growth mindset. And another way to do this, the other way to do this, is by reinforcing the growth mindset, the productive mindset, with everyday interactions. So you can do these theory-based interventions. They may be just one class session. It could be over several weeks. But the other idea is to then create ways that will emphasize this productive mindset. Things as simple as praise from teachers, or how you frame critical feedback. Right? We know that in order for us to make improvements, we need feedback. We need constructive criticism. But for students that are already feeling like they're not good at whatever, math, English, writing, when you give them critical feedback, what happens? They feel like it's confirmation, right? Oh, see, I know how to do this. But the way in which we frame that feedback can also be a means of altering students' mindsets. But it's very important that when you give praise, you praise the process, not the person. Right? Avoid saying things like, see, you're smart. Right? But focus rather on the effort that was put forth. You tried really hard. And so that has made a difference in your performance this time. You used really good strategies. Right? You asked for help from others and look at what you've accomplished. So focusing on the process as opposed to the person. And avoiding things that may be very well intentioned but can undermine motivation. Right? You are smart. You know, some people just really aren't good at math. It's okay. You know, I suck at math. Nobody's talking I heard it. I heard it at my son's elementary school. The teacher said, I said, if you have that attitude, how do you feel that? Right? So a lot of times, people may have good intentions, but because of the way that they frame their feedback, it actually does the opposite. It undermines motivation. I'm good, but I'm not that good, so I didn't memorize all of these research studies, but I wanted to share a few highlights because I think it's really interesting to see the work that's been done because it sounds good, like this sounds great, but then you say, no, but really, like, does it really do anything, you know? And I don't remember his name, the gentleman that was sitting in the back with the blue plaid shirt. He runs this area.
Yeah, nasty.
Yes. He said he read the book, and he said that was really what impressed him was the research studies, because it does. It sounds good, but then you go, well, you know, is this really going to work? Like, does this really do anything? Like, so I told Jimmy he did good. I said, really? Is that going to change anything? So here's a few highlights. And this has to do with praise and how you frame your feedback, right? So Carol Dweck and Claudia Miller did a study showing that praising young adolescents for their intelligence, saying things like they're smart when they did well, actually created a fixed mindset and in problems. It put them in a world where people evaluate intelligence. And so praising them as opposed to the process caused them to have a fixed mindset. They created the fixed mindset. Whereas in contrast, students that were praised for the process, their effort, their strategies, these students were put in a growth mindset and it actually fostered their resilience. In a similar study, Anita Rattan and Catherine Good showed that comforting struggling math students by saying the equivalent of, overall, you're smart, but it's okay. Some people just aren't good at math. Undermined their motivation and taught them a fixed mindset. And how do we talk to students? Being able to change their mindset, it seems like verbal input really wouldn't have that much of an impact, but 2 new studies suggest that it can create longer-term changes. Gunderson and his colleagues show that how parents praise a 1 to 3-year-old, whether they praise their process, their effort, versus their ability, predicted whether the child would have a growth mindset and a desire for a challenge 5 years later, just based on how they praise. Another study by Pomerantz showed that children 8 to 12 years of age, whose mothers used person praise rather than process praise, showed more change in the direction of a fixed mindset over a 6-month period, and they were tended to avoid challenge and choose tasks where they would learn less but be less likely to fail. Right? So we can see how interesting this is, that just the way you talk to them has an impact on the kind of mindset that they'll have. And these are things that are happening from the age of 1. So you're probably also thinking, well, gee, by the time you get to us, they're a lot older than 1. Right? So you've got all this residue. You've got all of this stuff that they've been learning and have been taught over time. But there is still hope, because it doesn't mean that just because that happened to them then, there's nothing we can do about it now. Right? So a few research studies that involved the theory-based interventions. Okay? There was a very interesting study using the Khan Academy website. So everybody knows Khan Academy. Online, you can work on all kinds of different problems. Over 250,000 students. They were learning math concepts. And there was growth mindset encouragement presented at the top of the screen. So there was something that said, oh, when you learn a new kind of math problem, you grow your brain. So the students that saw this message, as opposed to those that did not, the control group that did not see this message, they increased the rate at which these students successfully solved math problems even months after they no longer saw the message. So the message was gone, and they still were solving problems at an increased rate over the control group that never saw those messages to begin with. Okay. The little screenshot that I showed you came from a research study with over 1,500 high school students across 13 high schools across the country. They had that growth mindset session for just one classroom session over the internet. And it reduced the percent of courses failed by their low-achieving students by nearly 7 percentage points. So a 7% difference in the percent of courses failed by these students compared to the control group that didn't get that session. Okay? And the final one, which is particularly of interest to us because you've got high school students, middle school students, younger students, the website, university students, right? 7,500 students at a state university. And this was not even discipline-based, so it wasn't about math. This was introduced to them as the university mindset. So this one was done at a larger scale. It was just introduced in terms of how students would approach doing college, right? So outside of discipline. And this state university had high dropout rates. They did a web-based growth mindset intervention. It was a little something that they completed during their orientation, but the summer before their freshman year, it increased the percentage of students that earned more than 12 credits in the first term by 3 to 4 percentage points. And this effect was even larger for African American students. It was increased by 10 percentage points. And this particular measure was important because it is an early predictor of on-time graduation. And so when you hear about research studies, for those of you that do have some background in that vein, you might say, oh, well, you know, how do they design it? You know, what was the sample size? I gave you numbers, so the sample sizes were huge. These were randomized, double-blind studies, which means that the people that gave the interventions, the people that received the interventions, did not know whether they were in the control group or not. They were randomly assigned to their treatment groups. And the grades that were collected from registrars, from academics outside. It wasn't something that was self-reported. So in terms of research studies, the design was there. So the things that you're seeing, the things that they're seeing, are all significant results. So these brief interventions, even though it was just one little internet session, things like that, showed lasting effects on their learning and their performance. But you have to proceed with caution. So these are the ways that we can go about altering student mindset. But you have to be careful because there's lots of ways that the message can be lost. So you really want to focus on, in your design process, maximizing the effects as you plan your design. Right? One thing to keep in mind is targeting student beliefs. Right? So everyone's a little bit different. Your student population is a little bit different, even when you think about cultural differences. Right? So some students don't ask questions because culturally it's disrespectful. Right? So if you're designing an intervention where you're encouraging students to do certain things, you have to consider the beliefs of your targeted audience. When we were working on the growth mindset article that we used for the community college students, we had to adjust the language because you're talking about brains and neurons and neuroscience, and so we know how our students are. If you talk too high, then you make them feel dumb. If you talk too low, then you make them feel dumb. So you have to find like that middle ground, right? So we had to revise and edit the language to make sure that it fit the target audience. So you don't want to just pull something off the internet and this is great, it sounds wonderful, I'm going to give it to them. Right? Think about your target audience and make sure that you are customizing to that audience. You also want to deliver in a psychologically precise and potent way. A lot of these things end up on the internet and people just pull them down and they use them, but they have no idea where they came from, what theory they're based on, what are the criteria or the conditions under which you are to administer these things. Take the brain art, for example, and I'll show you a snippet of the one that we used. That whole growth mindset intervention and talking about growing the brain, if presented in the wrong way, it can actually have adverse effects. So if you tell students, read this is going to make you do way better in class, right? It has the opposite impact. So how you deliver your message and how you deliver the intervention is equally as important. You want to make sure that if it's connected to some theory or based on a particular design, that you're familiar with where it came from so that you administer it in the appropriate way. And then also you want to try to tap into processes that you already have built in that you can use to sustain the initial impact. So you do these quick, little interventions, well, and then how do you sustain that, right? Making sure that you create practices that are going to continue to encourage that productive mindset, that are going to have an effect on that mindset. And last but not least, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about assessment. I know everybody loves assessment. We love it, right? It's hard. I work with faculty a lot on assessment, so I know that you're lying. But assessment is really important because because how do you know that what you did worked, right? We have a tendency to find like the newest great idea and we try it, it was awesome. They seemed wonderful. And then you find something else, you try that too, you try this one, you try that one, you try this one, but you don't ever collect anything to allow you to measure the impact or the change. Or, better yet, to help you improve. Maybe something about the way that you administered that particular intervention had an adverse impact. Well, how will you know what you did and how to do it better next time? Right? So assessment is going to be an important piece of that. Think about the measures that you can put in place to understand what has changed and how you can do better. And so this is how we landed in a place where we were connecting to the practical theory of productive persistence. Because it gives us a way to be able to work collaboratively with researchers and practitioners. So the researchers have all these great theories, right? And then you're actually in the classroom doing this stuff, and there's never a conversation. And so that's where productive persistence comes from. It came out of the Carnegie work that we were doing, and it brought together the researchers, Carol Duet, David Yeager, many others, Jim Stigler, and put them in the same room with the practitioners. I'm in the classroom and this is what I see. And so together, we have worked on this idea of productive persistence, a more practical theory, which really focuses on the things that we see every day. Right? So it started with this work with developmental education. So a study was done, more than 1,000 developmental education students. Many of you are familiar with their plight. 50% of that more than 1,000 students had started college 3 years ago. 20% had started more than 5 years ago. 8% had actually started more than 10 years ago. And 2.5% had actually started more than 20 years ago. So when you think about these students, especially these down here, you can't say they don't try hard. Right? We have a tendency to talk about our students' lack of motivation, or that they're not trying hard enough. But if you've been in school for 20 years and you're still trying to get your degree, there's some natural, raw something that is keeping you moving forward. So that's something that students already have. How can we capitalize on that? Right? And so we have this tendency to just come up with all kinds of stuff that we can do to try to help them. You know what? I heard that student cohorts are really productive, right? So let's put in cohorts, they'll start together, they'll finish together. And then we can give them mentors, like the whole time. Because I read this really good article about how having a long-term mentor is really good. And then we should give them study skills. And we'll use some real-time data that we can follow. Maybe we give them some financial incentives, or make it like a game, right? They really like gaming, like video games, so let's make it like a game. But we have to hold them accountable, and we should help them choose a major and navigate the college and give them better orientation and put them in the proper courses and give them some counseling and help them plan their careers. And we're like doing everything. We throw it all at them, right? But again, we really have no idea if any of this stuff is helping. So with the Carnegie work that was done, we started with Statway. I think Miami-Dade worked with us with Statway. They might still be doing Quantway. But the focus is not so much on the pathway, but the strategy, right? So we thought, instead of us dictating what we should do to help students, why don't we try to look at things through their eyes? So what drives success for our students in our colleges? What is specific to them? And then let's find some ways to influence those drivers, those things that are already naturally pushing them towards success. Let's try to influence that. Let's use research and practice. So let's get the researchers in the room and the practitioners in the room. And then we'll try to create some practical ways to precisely measure these things. So if you think about the student, a lot of times students are thinking, maybe I just don't have what it takes to be here. Or maybe I don't belong. Or maybe my professors are biased. You know, I think I do a good job, but it just never seems like I get the grade. So thinking about these things is the basis of productive persistence. It's the idea that you take this natural tenacity, this raw talent that students have to continue to push forward, but you match it with good strategies. So you're making a combination of the motivation to keep pushing forward despite challenges, and then you add to that good strategies. Because we all know students that have maybe 3 jobs, right? They're taking care of their parents, they've got some kids, their husband is sick, but they're still here. So something is driving them, but they're not finding success. They're still pushing forward, they're being persistent, but not in a productive way, right? They're enrolled for 20 years, but they haven't graduated yet, right? So this is the idea behind productive persistence. Take that tenacity they already have, and let's match it with some good strategies. So the aim then is for students to continue to put forth effort during challenges, and when they do so, to use effective strategies. And there's really 5 primary drivers for this, drivers of the solution. So a lot of thinking and processing went into this, and we boiled it down to these 5. Students have skills, habits, and know-how to succeed in the college setting. Students believe they are capable of learning math. So this was done in the context of math, but absolutely can be applied in a broader sense. Students believe the course or courses they're taking have value. Students feel socially tied to peers, faculty, and the course. And faculty and college support student skills and mindsets. Okay, so these are the 5 primary drivers. These are the 5 primary ways to drive student success. But then you have to figure out how to move or make movement within each of these primary drivers. So there are secondary drivers. So if I look at just this one for a moment, students feel socially tied to peers, faculty, and the course. Right? What are some things that might make movement on that front? Well, students feel that the professor cares that they personally succeed in the course and in college. They feel they're a necessary and important part of the classroom and the community. They feel comfortable asking questions. They don't feel stigmatized due to membership in some particularly negative stereotype group. Right? So we can take each of those primary drivers and break them down. Students do not question whether they belong. And break them down into some secondary drivers that will help us to make movement towards that end. Right? I know you probably can't see that. There's some copies. And so then the idea is to consider these drivers and how you could design some change ideas, design some interventions that would allow you to make movement towards that end. It could be very simple things. Even just looking at those primary drivers, can you see any connections to the activity that we did when you came in? So if you think about your experience at the beginning of this session, I see the first part, I see the David.
So having us find something unique about ourselves is socially tied to our peers.
Absolutely, right? So students all have this same tendency, and we as educators do a really good job of doing exactly what they do, even though we complain about what they do. Right? You came in and you sat with your friends. You sat with the people you already felt comfortable with, right? Maybe they work in your discipline, or you're on the same campus, you're in the same department, you teach the same kinds of classes. So you sat with the people you felt comfortable with, and then you stay there. But it may have been a little bit uncomfortable at first, but now you know some other people. And then having that dialogue about things you have in common, right, breaks down some of those walls, and now you feel like you're connected to this person that you may never even have met before. You know what? Me and Rupert, we've ridden horses before. We have this thing in common, right? Anything else about that experience that you can see some connections here?
The feeling comfortable asking questions, the fact that you wanted us to ask a question just to get the first one out of the gate?
Yeah, right. Ask the question. Ask me a question about myself. So not only does it allow you to feel more comfortable asking questions, but then how do you feel about the instructor now? You know something about them. They're not just talking head in the front of the room. Did you know that she's got 2 kids? Did you know that she really likes math? Do you know that she likes to do Sudoku? I love to do Sudoku. So now you're not just this like strange person that they come in, it's like, you know, this 15th week of a 16-week semester and they don't even know your name or where your office is, right? So immediately, first day, you're making these connections. They're connecting to their peers as well as to the instructor. Right? Something that I observed that I think is particularly interesting. Right? Am I looking for colors or shapes? Excuse me? So initially, you wanted me to solve it for you. Right? Can you just tell me which table I'm supposed to go to? Why are you going to be walking around in circles with this stupid card? Right? But then you say, all right, she's not going to tell me. So I'm going to have to figure it out. Right? So you start going around and you're like, hey, okay, so I have that one. Which one do you have? Mine's kind of weird, but I have a different color. But well, you have a ticker too. I have ticker. So maybe we're in the same group. So you start thinking, you're having to reason on your own, you're working with others. You say, all right, I'm going to have to put forth some effort. Maybe I can ask someone else, look at some other people, right? So you're using strategies now. Whereas initially, you're talking about whatever. So there's these very subtle ways to do it. You had no idea that you were growing your brain. Right? So sometimes we think that things have to be like deep and philosophical and I'll change the world. This intervention is going to be the best intervention ever. I bought those cards at the Dollar Tree. Right? So there's all kinds of things. Don't underestimate what it is that you can come up with. It may not be the precise theory-based intervention, but these are the kinds of things that are the everyday experiences, right? That you can use to help students to continue to maintain, right? So maybe the theory-based intervention gets them introduced to the mindset, but then you have the opportunity with your everyday experiences and the things that you normally do in your class. Because I do this on the first day. Have them look over the syllabus, you know, do the little common ground activity, come up with something they want to ask me about the syllabus and then about myself. So it's a first day of class activity, right? So there's all kinds of things that you can do to try to make movement under each of these drivers, right? So I think just a little bit, and then we're going to take a break. So let me share a couple of things here. So a lot of the work that we did and where we brought in the connections to the growth mindset theory was this idea of students believing they're capable, right? So for us, it was of learning math. For you, it may be of writing or of belonging or other things. But this is the particular place where the work that I did with Carnegie happened. And we initially did some interviews with students, right? So here's a quote from a student after taking a math test. I'm embarrassed by how stupid I am, and I suddenly feel very discouraged. I can't even tell which fraction is bigger than another or where they should fall in the number line. I feel like crying. So in that fixed mindset, students are thinking, man, if I have to try that hard, I'm just not smart. I'm not a natural, so what's the point? Because I'll never get any better at it. It's just something I can't do. But what we're trying to get them to get to is this growth mindset where they realize that trying harder is what's going to make them smarter. That those are just obstacles. And obstacles can be overcome through effort, help from others, and use of better strategies. Now this is really important. Because it's not just the effort. In fact, that's frustrating to students when you tell them they're not trying hard enough, right? That they're not putting in enough effort, and they tell you, I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning doing my homework, right? I was in the math center all day. What do you mean not trying hard? I didn't even go to work. I was supposed to go to work and I called in, right? So a lot of times, you're just, man, just try a little harder. doing, and their willingness and desire to ask for help. So we co-developed and piloted a growth mindset intervention to use. I worked with Dave Yeager, who actually did his doctoral work under Carol Dweck. And so we used this researcher practitioner collaboration to help us adapt a version of a brain article that was already written to make it fit to math constructs as well as developmental math students as well as the community college. So he tweaked some things and then he gave it to me and I said, no way, you can't say that to them, let's fix it. Right? So we went back and forth and we revised this article so that it would be palatable by our developmental math students in a community college. And then we followed the intervention with follow the article with a letter to future students. There's a couple of questions, and I'll show you the next slide, that they have to answer after they read the article. And then we piloted, we did a small pilot first in one of my summer classes. Again, it was double-blind randomized, so I didn't know which group students were in. Some students got just an article about the brain, so it just talked about the brain and how the brain works. And then other students got the article that was infused with the growth mindset language, right? So I had no idea who got what, and neither did the students, because they looked at the next screen, they saw some pictures of brains too, and so they thought they had the same thing, right? And then after that initial success, they ramped it up, and in the fall tried it on a much larger scale at Santa Monica Community College. So the results were very similar between my smaller pilot of maybe 20 or so students, right? We never feel like that's enough, so we did it bigger, to be able to see if we could replicate the initial success. So this is just a snapshot of the article. It's about 2.5 pages. So students read the article. They did it online so that we could record their, actually some classes did it online and some did it on paper. I did it initially on paper because I wanted them to write. So they read this article and it talked about the brain, but it focused, it infused the growth mindset theory into what they were reading. So most people don't know that when they practice and learn new things, part of their brains change. They get larger, a lot like the muscles do. This is true even for adults. So it's not true that some people are stuck being not smart or not math people. You can improve your abilities a lot as long as you practice and use good strategies. So things like this were all throughout the article. It went into the neuroscience of it, so you can see this is a section of the cerebrum. It's talking about the brain cortex, so it gets into the science of it, so they feel this is really official. They're learning about the brain is working like this. And then it's followed with a little exercise, because saying is believing, right? Psychologically proven that if they can repeat it back, if they spend some time, not just reading, but actually processing it, that will make a difference. So they have a saying is believing exercise at the end, where they answer a couple of questions, and then they're asked to write a letter to a friend. So first they're asked to sort of summarize what they read, then apply it to themselves by thinking about an example from their own life where maybe there was something they weren't good at first, but then because they kept trying, they became really good at it. So they'll connect the things that, of course, they're interested in. So, oh, I didn't ride a bicycle, or I didn't know how to skateboard, or I didn't know how to ride horses, right? So, but I worked really hard, and then I learned how to do it. So they apply it to themselves. And then the last question asks them to write a letter to a friend explaining what they've learned and why they should use it. Because we can always tell other people what to do really good, but when it comes to ourselves, oh, this is amazing. But it really helps them to process it and to say it to someone, then they believe it more themselves. So this follows that reading of the article. So in terms of results, this is the larger group of students, 288 students at Santa Monica College. But again, this mirrors the results that we saw in my class. And I actually had students in this no, this was just a Santa Monica student. So when we looked at course dropout as a measure, right? So students were randomly split into these two groups. Some got just the brand article, some got the article with the growth mindset theory infused in it. And so then we looked at students who withdrew from the math course. So the control group that just got the brain facts, 20% of those students withdrew from math. Only 9% of those that have that growth mindset version of the article withdrew from that math course. Again, totally randomized, so there was a little bit of everybody not in both of those groups, right? It's not those that volunteered to read the brain article, things like that. So there was a 51% decrease in withdrawal from math. It took 40 minutes to do this intervention, and it cost nothing. Right? But a 51% decrease in student dropout from math. So again, really powerful results from a very brief intervention. We pulled a few students to interview after the exercise, and so it was interesting to hear some of their feedback. So one of the students said, as soon as I leave class, and this is a good example of what we were just talking about on effort, as soon as I leave class, I go to the lab. Right? When I leave the lab, I go home and I do more work. Even in the car, I'm studying. I just do work. All day long, I'm studying. And that was helping me fail my test. So if you talk to this student, you couldn't tell her she wasn't trying, because she clearly was. But after I read that article, it clicked for me. I changed my study habits. Instead of just doing work throughout all of my other activities, I started studying for shorter periods of time and actually studying, not just working the same problems over again. I tried that for the test and I did so much better. So part of what they read in the article was that idea of having to work more challenging problems. Just like when you work out, you use heavier weights. If you want to work your brain, you got to work some harder problems. So instead of just doing the same problems over and over and over again, try the tough ones. Don't skip them. Right? So she employed this, and it made a difference for her. I have this one just because I think it's adorable. I feel very confident because I dedicate my time to learn the concepts thoroughly. I feel that if one person put in the work to really understand the concepts, they can pass. I was never a math person, but coming into this course has completely made a 360-degree turn about how I feel about math. It's great. Right? 360 degrees right after you started. It's 180, but it's okay. So, totally different attitude. Still working math. But the attitude is right? So, you get the picture. So, time for a break. And what we're going to do when we come back, don't be too excited, I saw that. No, definitely time for a break. You guys, it's warm and you've been really attentive. I probably would have been asleep by now, personally, just because I get sleepy when I get home. So we're going to take about a 15-minute break. There's still some snacks and things back there. And then when we come back, we're going to actually work on trying to see if we can create some stuff. Okay? Each of you have sort of your own thoughts in mind about why you came here, what you would hope to be able to apply this to. So think about what your particular aim is. For us, it was, as is on the handout you have there, to have students continue to put forth effort during challenges, and when they do so, use effective strategies. So maybe that's it for you too, right? And then think about how you see those primary drivers influencing your aim, and pick one. Maybe your table has a couple of different ideas, but see if you can commit to one to work on together. And come up with some practical things that you could do in your classroom, in your office. I know some of you may be counselors or maybe in your area that can help you make positive movement on that particular aim. And then I'm going to have you report out. So let me give you an example. So you can see. So something like this, right? What's my aim? Students will such and such. Maybe you use the one we already have. And I'm thinking about this particular drive, that students feel that the professor cares that they succeed in college. And so a couple of secondary drivers that I focused on are having a routine for noticing attendance and participation and building in supportive course elements and structures. So here's an idea. Take attendance every day, right? That way they know that I notice whether they're here or not. Or I'll implement a course contract. So we're all going to read this contract, we're going to agree that we're going to support each other, that we're going to succeed together, and we'll do this on the first day of class, and we'll all sign it, we'll have a witness, and this will be a supportive element. It's built in, it's a part of the structure, so we're going to use this, right? So this is what I'm asking you to do. Think about it could be something that simple. You could try to change the world in the next 20 minutes if you want to. Right? You can be deep and complex, or you can come up with something simple, but this is what I'm asking you to do. Pick whole lot of time to think this all the way through. But creative intervention, design something that you think would move one of those drivers. And then we're going to talk about it. See what you come up with so I can steal your ideas.